Okay, and we're on. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, whichever part of the world you're in. I'm here with Udi Levy, and he is the co-founder and CEO of Cobwebs Technologies. Thanks very much for joining us, Udi.
Thank you very much for hosting.
Fantastic. So in this Hacker Hotshots, Udi is very kindly going to go through an overview of what Cobwebs Technologies is and what they do, and very likely a bit about the industry as well. And then at the end, we'll ask some questions. And that's pretty much it. So Udi, once you're ready, take it away, please.
Yeah, great. So nice to meet you all. Nice to be here. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Cobwebs. We're working worldwide with corporate security, law enforcement, government agencies. We're providing threat intelligence solutions, open source web intelligence, essentially. So what I'm going to focus today is on the digital risk protection sphere. And we'll just go slide by slide so we'll all get a grasp of what we're talking about, essentially. So the digital risk protection is part of the cyber threat intelligence, in which we're talking about the threats who are posing for various corporates and governments worldwide. Today, there are lots of cyber attacks, data leaks, lots of incidents, and physical threats against installation and employees. So essentially, we're talking about this area of external threat intelligence, because nowadays, as the world has become very, very digitalized, everything is cloud-based, every company has presence all around the web. So the requirement for digital risk protection is only evolving on a daily basis. So what is digital risk protection as opposed to standard threat intelligence, like the IT threat intelligence that you might know? So here we're talking about external threats protection, protecting if you are a corporate, your critical assets, because you have lots of domains, lots of emails, lots of employees' information. And today, everything is around the web, whether it's the open web or the deep web or the dark web. And there is lots of information in the dark web, and I'm going to focus about that. I want to talk about it a little bit. So it's using essentially the capabilities to monitor everything on the web, and all the, I would say, external environment of the corporate or of the government, in order to provide a protection and to provide information about threat actors and threat activities, which there are numerous. So what is the value essentially for the corporates? There is hundreds of billions of loss annually due to external threats, talking about lots of litigation costs, bad reputation, which is caused to these companies which are experiencing cyber attacks or phishing attacks. There is lots of leakage of information, especially if you are financial services or companies who are dealing with personal identities. So there is lots of loss of information there today, lots of leaks sold in the dark web, lots of external infrastructure of the company is exposed today. So essentially, there is like lots of loss in this area unless you are providing some kind of umbrella of external threats. Industries. I would say that the top one that we've seen at least is the financial services, lots of leakage of information, oil and gas, because they also have very critical, I would say, critical infrastructures, manufacturing, of course, and also increasing in retail, especially in the US and Western world. There is lots of attacks and phishing attacks relevant to this area, and of course, telecom and healthcare. So these are mainly the industries, and of course, the government as well, but that's another subject, maybe to another interview. The common use cases, I would say, usually it's lots of brand protection. Corporates need to protect their brand, and today it's critical because everything is online. Sorry. There is lots of fraud campaigns. You know, even us as a company, we're receiving fraud mails and phishing attacks almost on a weekly basis. Lots of data leakage, so data leakage detection, account takeovers, credential thefts, it's very common today. And of course, on top of all of that, from the technical aspect, every company has lots of exposed digital assets like IPs and domains and ports. So you can find them from the external environment of the web. And to understand where you can help in that perspective. So let's talk a little bit about the web landscape so we'll understand the context. So everybody are using usually, on a daily basis, the surface web, which is all the standard web engine, and maybe the surface social media. But essentially, most of the information today on the web is beneath the surface. You need to have credentials, you have restricted databases, lots of public records, lots of information resides below the surface web, which is accessible by search engines, but it goes even further to the dark web, which I would say is the lower part of the deep web, in which you really find lots of illegal information, especially drug trafficking, any types of selling of merchandise, which is illegal, identities which are leaked, credentials of banks or of many other companies, everything resides here. So essentially the web is not the only part that we've seen, which is the news and the social media. There is lots beneath it, and essentially lots of illegal activity, especially in this area of the web, which is the dark web. So what is the process usually to provide this kind of risk protection services? First of all, when you come to a corporate or to a big agency, you need to identify, to try to map what is the assets. The assets can be their domains, their emails, their VIP executives, any other information which can be leaked outside the company. And of course, the infrastructures, and any type of information that can help us as a company find the right solution for them for external threat protection, intelligence. Afterwards, once we map these assets of the corporates, we start monitoring, collecting lots of information from the web, from the deep web, from any other type of external environment, and try to monitor their assets and to see if there is, I would say, leakage of information, data breaches, bad reputation, and on. Afterwards, usually it's mitigating, trying to see how we can avoid this kind of, I would say, attacks, these takedowns, to reduce the takedown time, to try to remediate. And eventually, on the ongoing process, ongoing level, I would say, to maintain those activities which help to improve the security and to avoid this kind of incidents. And you'll be surprised to understand how many critical incidents on a daily basis, especially for big corporates, there are. So let's see some nice screenshots to understand more a little bit about the solution, what we provide. So deep web monitoring is the ability to access the deep web, the dark web, and to start monitoring it, trying to collect. So once we map the assets of a company, we know what kind of stuff to monitor, what's the specific keywords, whether it's maybe credit cards or any type of information relevant to this kind of security. Start getting the feeds from the dark web and from any other type. It can be also your internal environment of the company, if it's relevant, and start producing alerts. The next thing is to try to map the threats who are posing, to understand whether there are threat actors, if it's like groups or it's like phishing attacks. Try to map essentially and to identify which area we can protect from that company. And essentially, what we provide is the ability to visualize and to analyze everything. So here, for example, this is a data visualization of a complete threat landscape of a specific big corporate, in which we can see specific threat actors and the devices, I would say, or the infrastructure that they are harming. And we can see here connection, mediators, and connection to additional threats, which are more at the critical infrastructure level, and on and on and on. Of course, I would not, dig into every technical detail here right now, but essentially it really involves lots of data visualization, lots of AI processing, because essentially today the information is so, I would say, it's so vast, it's impossible to continue using manual analysis and try to identify on a daily basis this kind of attacks. you must use some kind of AI power tool or a big data analytics tool. Eventually, what we provide is a risk calculation in which we try to understand where that entity stands, if it has risk, in which kind of levels, from which type of sources, what are the types of alerts who are triggered from them.
Hello. Gosh, I think it seems like we've lost Udi.
Reporting and remediation, because eventually on must be able to automatically conduct reports, can be on a, to understand which type of risks and to try to evaluate them on the time and to recommend on the relevant remediation process. Maybe it's a specific infrastructure part which is in risk. Maybe it's a data leakage. And we saw, it's crazy amounts of data leakage are out there on a daily basis, hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes of personal data from companies, of credentials from banks, and on and on and on. And of course, if you try to, I would say, to ignore this part, it's impossible essentially today. Maybe around 5 years ago or 6 years ago, this whole digital risk protection was, I would say, it wasn't a necessity. It was a nice to have tool. Today, as everything evolved, it's a critical part of every, I would say, medium-sized and of course big-sized organizations. This product, this solution is usually designated for corporates. It's for, I would say, for the GSOC, the Global Security Operations Center, and this kind of departments in which they have their analysts that can use our tool. And of course, we have different types of customers. So, for every, I would say, industry, there is a different kind of usage. So just before I summarize, I will be happy if you have like several questions, maybe from you or from the audience, so I can, address them.
Yeah, thanks very much. Very interesting. It's a fantastic product you have, service. I do have some questions for you. The first one is, what's your take on, do you have any say with regards to what I'm going to call, well, what everyone refers to as fake news? And my question really is, who draws the line with the opinion? Is that something which you have any, like, does your client say fraud is fraud and, bad reputation is bad reputation? Is there, is there a line that can be crossed with opinion? I mean, who makes that decision? Is it your clients?
Yeah, usually, when we start working with a customer, with big customer, usually we need to map their assets. So sometimes this kind of, I would say risk that you pose, bad reputation versus fraud, it can be of different departments. And therefore, we actually divided our tool to two parts. There is, I would say, an investigative part, and usually it's more for the fraud teams, I would say, if it's financial services, for example. So they can investigate by themselves, they can decide by themselves what they want to do. And there is, I would say, a monitoring part. It's mainly used for the reputation analysis and maybe data leakage, I would say, which requires a little bit less investigation, but really more, monitoring and alerting. So eventually, we give it to the customer to decide. We don't want to decide anything for the customer, so that's why we developed a product rather than a service, I would say.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. What is the main difference between threat intelligence and digital risk protection?
Great question. So, of course, threat intelligence is, I would say, is the initial term, and then the more global term for all the aspects of threats. It can be internal threats, like endpoint security, like antiviruses, and and other types of endpoint security services in the IT department, the SOC teams, while digital risk protection is an evolving, I would say, an evolving industry, which is in a way a subsidiary or a daughter of the big threat intelligence landscape. So it's inside it. It's one part of the big threat intelligence landscape.
Okay. Do you see a specific industry where your solution is most relevant?
Yeah, it's possible to say so. I would say that the financial services, the energy, and the retail are really evolving. You know, from the reason I said before, if the financial, you have lots of data leakage, in the retail, lots of phishing attacks, and the oil, it's a critical infrastructure, which, you know, all the time requires continuous monitoring and alerting. So it would, I would say those three, but of course it's relevant to all others as well.
Cool. And on that subject, what kind of attack vectors do you see? Do you see a lot of APTs or you know, phishing? What's the sort of the most common attack vector?
Yeah, so today, of course, there is lots of phishing attacks, especially I would say in the COVID, because, you know, maybe people have, you know, these hackers have too much time right now, and everybody is online all day long. So I would say lots of phishing attacks. You can see it everywhere. Everybody try to be more creative, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot of data breaches, which is also interesting. It just shows that, you know, there is still this field is evolving. You know, there are so many data breaches on top of the antiviruses that we have, and the all, you know, protection on our servers and to the cloud. Still lots of data breaches. So both of them, I would say, phishing and data breaches.
Yeah, and of course, with COVID, everybody's working from home. So I guess that's a big challenge, right? As well, you know, more phishing opportunities. Another question is, what is the future for Cobweb Technologies and the industry as a whole?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I would say that as we see it, you know, the digitalization process of the whole world is just evolving all the time. And as we said, you know, a minute ago, the COVID just pushed everything. Notice that everybody now is talking online. You know, your kids are working with Zoom from, you know, they're 5 years old. So it's crazy, really, how we became digitalized with the social media, and everything is on the phone or on the web. So sure, this field is evolving, and you know, it's like they invented the antivirus maybe 30 years ago, or I don't remember when, but still there are viruses, still there are threats. So it's the same here on a different aspect. This, as long as the information is out there, as long as everything is cloud on the web, there will be more attacks. It will evolve, and it will be, you know, cat and mice chase, you know, Tom and Jerry chase all the time. Yeah.
Interesting. That's very interesting. I mean, it's a fascinating subject. I'm sure that every day is different, and you know, the threats which you must see must be fascinating, right?
Yeah. It's amazing to see this world, you know. Unfortunately, this is the situation, but you know, this is the business.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for keeping us safe, Udi.
Yeah, thank you very much, and we'll be happy to meet again.
Absolutely. All the best, and thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.